So I'm going to talk about product management, as Rachel said. Hopefully that's what you're here for. And I guess I'll just jump right in. So there's actually really only two things that I plan on talking about today. One is how should you PM your company when you don't have a PM proper, a product manager, somebody with that in the title. And then two, when should you hire a product manager proper? So I'm curious, this is based on my estimation of the people that we have in the room today, but I'd like to validate that. How many people in the room work for a company that has somebody with the title product manager? Like, yeah, 3 or 4 or 5 or something like that. Okay, that's roughly what I expected. I wouldn't have been surprised if it was 0. And how many people have at least considered or sort of gone through the thought process of should I hire somebody called a product manager? More, okay. Probably half, I think I saw. So maybe I'll spend more time on the first half and less time on the second half. Yeah, without further ado, how should I PM without a PM? So what does a PM actually do is actually a good and complicated question. I think if you asked 10 product managers what they do, they would probably describe their job in different ways. So I was actually hoping to kind of like get your suggestions of what you think a product manager actually does. Any volunteers? What's one thing a product manager does? Yeah.
Roadmaps, product feature.
Roadmaps. Sure.
Converts customer feedback into those roadmaps.
Yep. Managing feedback. Sure.
Competitive landscape.
So understanding the competitive landscape. Yeah.
Understanding your personas and use cases.
Personas, use cases. If anybody didn't hear.
Ships product.
Ships product. Yeah. What does that mean? I mean that there's a lot of things that happen before product ships, right?
Yeah. A lot of things what they said, and then making sure that your whatever your roadmap is actually getting executed. So that's interfacing with engineering design and all
Yeah.
the constituencies, stakeholders, and making sure that
Yeah. So.
the project is going as planned.
Is it sort of like shepherding product through the process and make sure it gets out the door? I think that's true. Yeah.
I think he or she is also like the decider at the end of the day as to what goes and what doesn't go in a certain version or release.
So the decider in terms of scope and how features should act and behave and so forth, and behind.
Subject matter expert, so to speak, of the product. So knows every component. So the connectivity with the rest of the organization would be a salesperson is talking to a client and they only know this level. Once the client wants to get a little more, the product manager would be the person.
Yeah, so subject matter expert, and the other thing you touched on is communication and sort of connecting the dots and making sure everybody has the information that they need. Yeah, go ahead.
Defines and specifies
Defines and specifies. Defines and specifies what?
the product or service. For both.
The product. Yeah, so go ahead, yeah.
Identify key performance indicators.
Yeah. Key performance indicators. So what actually is worth measuring, right? I think that is also true. I think everything that everybody said is true and is often a part of a product manager's role, and also not always a part of a product manager's role. You can probably find lots of great product managers who do 60% of the things we just mentioned, and somebody else is responsible for, or some number of people are responsible for the other 40%. And there are things that we didn't say that are also key parts of product management. And I think that's one of the really tricky things about product management and is really important, is that there really is not a shared definition of product management. Not that that's unique to product management, but it is something that's important to keep in mind. The things that I would sort of bucket the key responsibilities of a product manager into, and I think this overlaps with a lot of the things you guys said, but I find this to be kind of a useful way to compartmentalize these things. Product strategy and vision, so that includes roadmap building, it includes specifying features and so forth, at some level anyway. Communication, which you guys touched on, making sure that everybody in the company has the information they need, and oftentimes people outside of the company as well. Cheerleading and nagging are maybe two sides of the same coin, making sure things are getting done, encouraging people to do good work fast. and nagging when they're not as nicely as one can. And then also, I think, guidance into the development process. So, product manager may or may not be a software engineer, but in many cases is not writing code. But I think you still have a stake in what the development process, what the deployment process looks like, and you need to make sure that end-to-end, from idea to release, that's working in a way that is shipping a successful product. So I think it's totally the product manager's business to worry about that kind of thing. So I think for this particular crowd, where we have mostly people who do not have a product management proper, one of the core questions is, can a CEO or a founder or another company leader sort of do the job of product management without a product management proper? And I think the answer is yes. I think it's actually a pretty natural job. The stuff that I'm talking about, product strategy, communication, all that stuff sounds like part of a CEO's job description, I think, or a CTO, depending on how your company is organized. But I do think that there are some potential pitfalls when you combine product management tasks into another leadership role. So the next few slides are sort of about some of those pitfalls. One, and this is one that I experienced, my discipline is product management. I came to product via Google. I joined Google in 2007, I guess, and was doing product management there until 2012, which is when I came to Ticket Leap right here in Philly and became a director of product. Today I'm the chief product officer at Ticket Leap, and I manage a team that includes all of our software engineers, our product designers, and also our QA. And so I am the product manager, sort of, the de facto product manager, certainly, but I'm also the people manager. And I think that can get tricky. It's hard, because when I'm talking to my team, it's not always clear whether I'm giving them feedback as the person looking out for the product and sort of with the hat of the product manager, or whether I'm giving them feedback or telling them something as their manager. And so one thing that I found somewhat helpful is just to be explicit about what hat you're wearing. And it doesn't stop at those two things, but I do think being sort of open and direct about where those two agendas can kind of cross a little is helpful and important if you are a CEO or a CTO and you're managing people, but you're also responsible for managing just the best interests of the product. Hopefully I just drank some ice. I'm afraid the mic is going to mic my ice crunching. But so another important thing to keep your eye on if you're sort of playing this dual role and not a product manager proper. I think one of the goals that should be top of mind, and this is not specific to product management. I think this will resonate with anybody that's doing business well. But I think it's particularly important if you're trying to handle product management. You have to figure out a way to encourage autonomy, let people have the latitude they need to make decisions. Even though part of your role is decision making, you can't be making all the decisions, right? Like, that's why you have other people at the company that are smart and that you trust. So encouraging autonomy, giving people the leeway to make those decisions, but doing so, I think the way you do that is through finding alignment at the level at which it matters. So being explicit about what your vision is, and also supporting that vision with the context and with the data that sort of, that drove you to that particular vision. And that might be one thing to look out for if you are also CEO or CTO. I think on a product manager, there's maybe a little bit more burden of proof. If a CEO says, this is my vision, and you join the company sort of with that assumption in mind, you're kind of already sold, right? But if a product manager is crafting that vision, I think to bring the team along successfully, you need to do a pretty good job of showing the data that got you there. You're probably, if you're product managing, you're probably making decisions that aren't obvious. If you're only making really obvious decisions, you're probably not doing something terribly interesting in the product. So again, surfacing all of that color, all of that context, so that your team actually feels like they see what you see and they want to accomplish it as well, and they have the data they need to make decisions instead of sort of coming back to you every time they run into a roadblock, I think is super critical. One model that I think is useful here is, I think John Doerr maybe coined this, but you want missionaries, not mercenaries. I think for me, that's one of the things that I aspire most to. Like if I am creating a team of missionaries, not mercenaries, I'm doing my job well. And in fact, at Ticket Leap, I think a few months ago, we sort of blew up our whole development process because I felt like it was too conducive to mercenaryhood and not conducive enough to missionaryhood. So we made a bunch of changes, and it's been amazing to kind of watch people fill the autonomy that process change has given them. So all of this, I think, makes probably a lot of sense and isn't too controversial, but it's also a lot easier said than done. How do you figure out a way to offer a compelling, consistent vision, but also give people the autonomy they need to kind of operate within it? One model that works well for Google, and we actually don't do this at Ticket Leap, but maybe we should, is something called OKRs, which maybe you guys have, I wouldn't be surprised. How many people know the term OKR? Some people. So it just stands for objectives and key results. Objectives are high level, like I want to accomplish this. Key results would be a little more specific and sort of as measured by something. So that's a really handy tool for a product manager to set some clear goals and then let the team figure out their own way to actually meet those goals. And if you're specific about how you're going to measure success, then of course, you're not setting the team up to fail, right? Because they know exactly what success looks like. So do you. And then within that, they have the space to kind of make decisions and ask you when they need the help. This kind of, all of that sort of bleeds into this next point, which I don't really know if they're even separate points. But I think being really intentional and thoughtful about your level of involvement in product decisions, both how involved you are and sort of how, at what sort of level of granularity in the product. Like, are you giving feedback at the pixel level, or are you just talking about product strategy? And I actually don't think there's a right answer. I don't think you can just like choose a point on that scale. I think that sometimes it's totally appropriate to be nitpicking at the pixel level about the thing you're going to ship. If that's critical to your, some products actually rely really deeply on the sort of pixel perfection and the feel and all of these kind of like softer, really in the weeds things. And then there are products where that is not the important thing to be nitpicking on, or you have the people that can do that without any guidance from you. So I don't think there's a right answer there. I think the right answer is simply just to be really thoughtful and intentional about it, and not sort of nitpick at the wrong level arbitrarily or without intention. I didn't tell you there was going to be a pop quiz, but there's going to be a pop quiz. All right, so who can give me the author and title of the PM manifesto that begins, "Good product managers know the market, the product line, and the competition extremely well and operate from a strong basis of knowledge and confidence. A good product manager is the CEO of the product." Sure, shout it out. Ben Horowitz is correct. The title of this article is, he does include it in his book. That's true. I'll give you a half point. Anybody know the title of the actual document that he includes? Good PM, bad PM. Yep. Good product manager, bad product manager. So people always want to know if there's like a textbook for product management, and there's really not, in part because everybody has a different definition of what product management is. My favorite product management resource, at least in a couple page length, is Good PM, Bad PM by Ben Horowitz. It's funny, just this morning, I went to his site to copy this. I mean, a few days ago when I created the presentation. And he has this like huge disclaimer at the top of the page. He's like, this was written 15 years ago. Most of it probably doesn't apply anymore. I'm just leaving it here as a reference. So he doesn't even really believe in it anymore, which gives you a taste of how sort of ever-changing and controversial the definition of a product manager is. And not every point in it rings true with me. He definitely has a point of view in this document, but there's a lot of pretty awesome stuff in there. And it's definitely, if this is a topic you're interested in, it is definitely worth a read. It'll take 5 minutes of your time. And I bring that up sort of apropos of this next bit. When you do make decisions, whether it's pixel level, strategic, or anywhere in between, I think it's really valuable to do so formally, even when you're a small startup. And this is something that Ben Horowitz's document got me thinking about. He talks about gathering information informally and making decisions formally, specifically in writing, which doesn't feel natural when you're a company of 22 people or 10 people necessarily. It can feel weird to write like, a doc with a decision and send it to the whole company and ask them to read it. But I actually think that it's really valuable and can kind of save confusion and lack of clarity down the road. I had my last boss at Google, actually, who's a super great guy. He was the CEO of AdMeld, and Google acquired AdMeld and him with it. He used to say, people say engineers don't like PowerPoint presentations. Engineers love PowerPoint presentations. And I don't know whether that's like a specifically true comment, but the sort of sentiment that like people actually like a little bit of formality and like clearness and the decisiveness that comes with putting something into a PowerPoint, that is worth something. And just because nobody else is doing it at the company doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing it. You should probably be filling that hole and offering some clarity and some formality. All right, so that gets us to the second half. Is it about 11:45? It is. We're actually ahead of schedule. That's good. All right, so when should you hire a PM? You're doing all those things. It's generally working. But at some point, your company's growing, and you're asking yourself, should I actually hire somebody with the title product manager to do product management specifically? So this is my list of reasons why you should say yes, the answer to yes to that question. Yes, I should hire a PM. One is when you can't be the protector of the long-term product vision because your relationship to individual clients and partners doesn't allow you to, which I think sounds somewhat counterintuitive, because you would think if you're the CEO or the CTO, you would automatically be gifted with this sort of like long-term, high-level view of the product and of your business. But in my experience, that's not necessarily true. CEOs and other founder types can actually be quite reactive and sort of indebt themselves to clients or to partners in ways that I don't think make for good product decisions long term. So you need somebody at the company who has the ability to actually step back and not be reactive and not think about like closing this deal now or about whether this customer that has your cell phone number is going to be upset, but just think like 5 years from now, what is this going to mean if we do this in the product? Another pop quiz. All right, so who famously said, if I had asked my customers what they wanted, they'd have said faster horses?
Ford.
Henry Ford. Everybody got that wrong, because he didn't say it. I don't know if that's true, we're pretty sure, but based on my research, we're pretty sure Henry Ford never actually said this, but it's a wonderful apocryphal thing that makes a lot of sense, and we should keep using in product management presentations anyway. His point, of course, is that feedback needs to be managed. Feedback is data points. It is not actually a set of instructions. That's not related to that. So this is really important, and I thought I had more written about it. But I think somebody spoke to this earlier. It's not just about getting feedback and like making that into an engineering task, right? It's about having the patience and the time and the vision to kind of pull together all of these data points into something that is a solution that maybe your customers know to ask for, or maybe they don't. And which of those two things it is might depend on your product and the space and so forth. But it is important for whoever is playing the product management role to have the capacity and the patience and the sort of fortitude and the willingness to say no to go through that process meticulously. All right, so another reason that you should actually hire a PM. When the product team, especially engineering, but also design, doesn't find you credible as a product manager. And maybe this is obvious. You want your company to find you credible, But it is possible. You could be a credible CEO, and your team could love you as a CEO, but not find you credible as a product leader, product manager. And it doesn't matter whether they're right or not. You could be the world's best product manager, but if you haven't convinced your team that you are, then it's just a non-starter. So if there's a perception that you're not credible as playing the product manager role, you need somebody who is. And you should give yourself, I think, a pretty short timeline to get there. Like, if you realize that this problem is occurring and you can't fix it in the span of something like a month, I think you should hire a product manager. Or you need to fix your team, right? If you think that that's where the fallout is, then somehow you need to make it so that the equation is, the engineers, the product designers, everybody on the product team feels that there's a credible person to make product decisions in the room. Another reason to hire a product manager proper is when you find that you can't give honest feedback or make unpopular decisions because it's too loaded coming from the CEO. So obviously everything, well, maybe it's not obvious. I think this is somewhat fixable, and it depends on how you run your company and the culture and so forth. But when the CEO says something, oftentimes it sounds different than when a product manager says something or an individual engineer says something. So I think just being honest with yourself about that, and this also touches on the sort of being explicit about what hat you're wearing, but making sure in any case that you have to be able to give feedback. You have to be able to make unpopular decisions. And if your role as CEO, CTO, anybody else in the company is getting in the way of that, then you probably need to hire a product manager. Ideally one who does not manage people. All right, another reason to hire a product manager is when you don't have the time or willingness to do some administrative crap, like preparing docs for a product meeting. So product managers are not chiefly administrative crap doers. This is something that Ben Horowitz speaks sort of passionately to in Good Product Manager, Bad Product Manager. He says you're not the gopher for the product team. You're not the note taker. But running a good development process does take some administrative crap. And if you're not willing or able to do that some of the time when it's needed and to fill those holes, then you need to hire somebody who is willing to do it. I think meetings in particular are a key thing to focus on. Meetings are such a time suck for a small startup. If you have 8 engineers in a room for an hour, that's a lot of development power. And so you need to be able to run those meetings efficiently, whatever that means for your team. This is something that Larry at Google was like super obsessed with when he became CEO. I remember one of the first things he did was he sent an email to the entire company, which is like 30,000 people at the time, and it was just his sort of manifesto on how to run an effective meeting. And it had these very specific rules, like only 7 people are allowed in a meeting, and it has to stop 5 minutes before the normal half-hour end time, so that people have time to transition to the next meeting, so that it can start every meeting can start exactly on time. And he might have been overcompensating perhaps a bit and making a strong point. But I think the general sentiment that meetings can be a time suck and they can easily be unproductive. And if you're running a meeting sort of as the product manager, being able to do whatever it takes to make sure that you're organized and using that time efficiently is critical. Maybe I should hire a product manager. It just occurred to me. Okay, another reason, I think this is the last reason, and it's a critical one, to hire a PM is when you find that you're often the bottleneck for work that can't be distributed effectively to your team. You can ignore all the typos in that sentence, or not sentence. I'm actually a huge fan of distributing a lot of work to the team and a lot of things that are considered product management. I have a software engineering team where the individuals and product designers are making tons of decisions that I think in some organizations would be considered product manager decisions. And when I hire software engineers, I actually tell them that they're going to be playing product manager for their own work. So I totally believe in distributing work to the team, but there's some, and distributing decision-making power, there's some things that you can't do that with. I think you can't do that with resource assignment, for instance, like figuring out how to match a person with work that they can do productively. I think that needs, I think you can ask a team to do that, to divvy it up within the team. I haven't seen that work super effectively, to be honest. There are other decisions that are just too controversial and too unpopular to ask your team to make, I think. And you want to be willing and able to like take on the burden of those decisions. So, and all of those decisions, of course, end up being stoppers of progress if you don't make them fast enough. So if you don't have time to unblock your team by making those decisions, then it's probably time to considering adding somebody who can make the time for that. So the very last piece to this topic is, say one of those things applies to you, or 4 of them, possibly in my case. Hiring your first PM. Some tips on that. I think the key thing is, this sort of like ties back to the opening topic. Be very clear about what you want. It is not obvious if you just put up a job description for product manager and you say do product manager things. That will mean 20 things to 20 different people. So I think just having that clarity internally first about what it is you're looking for is really key. And then also communicating that to candidates in one way or another, so that you're actually finding the person that will fulfill the things you are looking for. Seems totally obvious, but people definitely get it wrong. I've seen, I think product managers have oftentimes pretty high turnover because there's been some miscommunication and some mismatch there. I was just talking to one of my sort of mentors the other day, and he was telling me about this like super smart young kid who was trying to, adult, who was trying to break into product management, and he got him this job at this like fast growing startup. And after like 3 weeks, his manager, the director of product, fired him because she felt like she was like had to teach him everything. And Brian was saying like, just like use him, he's so hungry, like just teach him everything, use him as your admin if you want, and he'll learn and he'll get better. But that just wasn't what she was signing up for when she hired a product manager. So just being super explicit about this, I think will serve about what it is that you want, serves you well, serves the candidates well, and make sure that you actually get a good fit. A couple examples of where you can kind of run into a bad fit if you're not explicit and thoughtful about it. I sort of mentioned the junior-senior thing. Also, like just the difference between oftentimes what people think they want if they have a consumer product and what they want if they have an enterprise product can be really dramatic. If you are building an enterprise product, oftentimes that means you want a product manager who can do a lot of interfacing with customers and have a little bit more of a outward-facing role. If it's a consumer product, you probably want somebody who can do a little bit more like, making sense of data, thinking creatively. And those are actually totally different personality types, potentially. Like some people are good at both of those things, but there's no guarantee that you could be a great PM and be sort of bad at the other thing. The other thing to note that's probably obvious, but a sort of crucial mistake, and people make it all the time, is that if you're not willing to let go of product strategy, don't hire somebody to do it for you. That's a recipe for failure. You hire somebody, tell them to run product strategy, and then don't really trust them to do it because it's your baby. If you're going to ask them to do it, you have to be willing to let them do it. On the flip side, if you're not good at doing product strategy, hire somebody right away. None of those other things need to get checked off. A good startup needs good product strategy thinking. Okay. Any questions? I was having a hard time figuring out how to talk for 45 minutes to such a large group of people that probably all had completely different agendas and interests and concerns and questions in their heads. But I think we have at least 5 minutes if anybody has a question that I didn't touch on. Yeah.
Where do you tell someone to go that's totally new, still starting to develop connections? I mean, what's other than interviewing a lot of people and seeing who you have a fit with or giving them small tasks, what's a good way to start finding people to begin with?
When you're hiring, how do you actually find product managers?
Yeah.
That's very tough. It's very tough in Philly too, because we have a growing tech scene, but it's since product management is kind of a rarefied role, There's just not that many of us. So you either have to be willing to take on somebody who hasn't done it before and is just like eager to learn and willing to, and you're comfortable with that person making mistakes and they have the hunger and that's what matters. You could start with like Wharton MBA students. Oftentimes, MBA students have product management in their list of things they're interested in. Or you can be really patient and look for of the 40 people in Philly or people that want to be in Philly that have actually done product management, you can try to find them. If you want to do that, I think just talking to other product managers, I'm sure there are sort of product managers in Philly that I have not met, but I imagine I've at some point met a good number of them. So I always tell people, like, let me know if you're looking for a product manager, because on the flip side, I have folks coming to me saying, do you know of any good product management gigs? So use our network. On that note, if you are a product manager or you work with one, we have a Slack channel now. It's pretty quiet, pretty tame and small, but there's, maybe 30 of us on it or something. So we'd love to have other folks join it, and we can post jobs there and stuff like that.
As a founder who's a product manager, what are some good resources to learn more about the technical requirements? Because a lot of times, there's like basically an argument between developers and product manager of how long it's going to take to develop a certain feature set.
So how can you be sort of
How can I learn more so I can understand that?
Yeah, I don't know that there's an easy answer for that. I mean, I think to some extent you do, if you're not totally technical, you do have to until you are the expert, you have to kind of trust your engineers. I think you can sort of along the way figure out at least what questions to ask. A good question to ask is like, is there a way to de-scope this that would cut it, you could do 80% of the work in 50% of the time? And if you keep asking questions like that, you'll start also like learning what kinds of things are expensive to do and getting sort of like a gut sense for it. I also think, like, I've had for my entire, so at Google, it's actually a pretty hard requirement that product managers were software engineers, and I'm not. And only by sort of good luck and good friends and good network did I become a product manager as a result. Like, Larry had to sign something, which is stupid because he has much better things to do with his time. And I have like massive, like, deep-seated sort of feeling of inadequacy as a result. Like, I would love to be a competent software engineer, and I'm just not. And I always have on my list of like things that I want to do, like build a great app, to help prove myself otherwise, like become more competent as an engineer. And I've never satisfactorily checked that box, but I actually do think, like, even the fact that it's on my list is valuable. Like, I look for opportunities to challenge myself technically. I ask questions. So I think setting that up as a goal for yourself, even if you never can really honestly carve out enough time to be a great software engineer, is probably a good thing too.
Thank you.
Yeah?
Yeah, so this is kind of a random question, but so as a product manager, especially in your case where you said you like delegate a lot of your work, which is probably a very good thing.
Mm-hmm.
What percentage of your time would you guess you spend both communicating with other departments about decisions,
Yeah.
and also like how often do you try to reach out of that like explicit team that you work on for more inspiration to kind of bring back to the group and inspire them in various ways to help delegate work appropriately and make the right decision.
So how much information is going to and coming out of people that don't explicitly build the product, people like the customer-facing team, et cetera, and how much is, okay. Yeah, I don't know that there's a right answer for that. I mean, certainly in terms of just like the amount of time spent, I think as much has to do with team size than anything else. Like at Google, my last product that I was working on had, I don't know, maybe 400 people in the world that were somehow supporting it directly. So I spent a lot of time just like figuring out how to communicate effectively to that group. At Ticket Leap, like I can just yell something and everybody's heard it, so less time. I do think you want, chances are you're running a startup where like the product is kind of, the center of the universe, and you at minimum want all of the teams to feel invested and heard, and you want them to feel like it's their product. So I think whatever amount of effort and communication and whatever conversations you need to have to make the whole company feel like this is their product is probably the right answer. That's not a very, I know that doesn't give you a formula, but.
You have the conversations and that it's very important to bring everybody in.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Sure, maybe I think last question. Yeah. Go ahead.
What structures work best for you? You were saying that meetings can kind of be a time suck, and but at the same time, structure and formality can be really beneficial for groups of any size. What is the balance? You know, you're managing a product, you have a team working on it, they have to hit milestones. Is it better to have meetings that are weekly meetings, and they know that there's a meeting, there's going to be an update and recap, or is it more beneficial to do it as needed or necessary? Like, which have you found is better for a team?
Yeah, I think it depends too. I hate to keep giving it depends answers, but I think that there are meetings that make sense to have rhythmically for sure, and meetings and like emails that make sense to plan to send rhythmically. Like some rhythm is good. You can do that, and then eventually find yourself in a world where it feels like there's just too much of that, too much structure. And if you get that feeling, then I say rip stuff out, and you rip stuff out and you see where it hurts and where you need to fill those holes, and then you can kind of selectively add stuff back in. So that's one way of calibrating it, is just like letting it build up and then sort of recalibrating. Yeah. All right, I think that's time. So thank you guys, appreciate it.